The Lightless Mile. Good evening, Mr. Williams. My name is Raphael, and I'm a long-haul trucker from the outskirts of Zacatecas. I've been listening to Carreteras de la Oscuridad for months now, always during my solo night drives. I never thought I'd write in, but after hearing a recent story that reminded me too much of something I went through years ago, I knew I had to share mine. Maybe, just maybe, someone else out there experienced the same. So buckle up, turn off the lights, and let me take you down the lightless mile. It happened back in 2016. I had just gone through one of the roughest periods of my life. My mother had passed away after a long illness, and I carried a guilt so heavy I felt it in my chest like a rock. I was her only son, and barely made it back in time for the funeral. Work had me crisscrossing the country, and I had told myself she'd pull through, that I'd see her next weekend. That weekend never came. After the funeral, I went back to the road because I didn't know what else to do. That's all I had. The hum of the engine, the hiss of the tires on old pavement, and the smell of diesel. The silence in the cabin was better than the silence of the house. One route took me through a forgotten stretch between Sombrerete and a little ejido near Fresnillo. It was close to midnight, pitch black. No gas stations, no trailers parked along the way. Just endless mesquite, dirt, and shadows. I'd taken that road many times, but that night it felt different. Heavier, like the road was pulling me in. Around the 40th kilometer marker, I saw a light ahead, faint, flickering. I thought it was a fire, maybe someone burning trash in the distance, but as I got closer, it looked more like a lantern. Then I noticed a man standing next to it, just by the edge of the road. He didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there holding the lantern. At first, I thought of stopping. A trucker's instinct. Maybe he needed help. But as I slowed down, something told me not to. That kind of gut feeling you get when something's wrong, even if you can't explain why. His face, I couldn't see it. The light should have lit it up, but it was like the shadows clung to him. I passed him slowly, heart racing. I checked my mirrors, but he was gone. Not just out of sight, gone. No light, no man, no trace, like I'd imagined it. I chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe stress from everything with my mother. I tried putting on music, but the radio only gave static. Not even my USB worked. Then the temperature dropped. Zacatecas nights are cold, sure, but this was sudden. The windows fogged, my breath came out in clouds. I turned the heater on, but it just blew cold air. Then the engine coughed, power flickered, lights dimmed. I pulled over, not wanting to break down in the middle of nowhere. I got out, wrapped in my jacket, and stepped into the stillest silence I've ever known. No crickets, no wind, no distant hum of engines. I opened the hood, checking what I could, when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, crunching gravel, coming closer. I turned, expecting to see someone, maybe that man from earlier. But there was no one. Only that same lantern, now resting in the middle of the road behind my truck. Flickering, unattended. I didn't see anyone place it there. I would have. I was watching. My skin crawled. I jumped back in the cabin and locked the doors. Tried the engine again. Nothing. Then I heard something on the roof. 3 knocks. Like someone climbing or tapping. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared straight ahead. The lantern's light began to grow. Not in brightness, but in size. Like it was getting closer, even though it didn't move. I shut my eyes, started whispering a prayer I hadn't said since I was a kid. A sudden jolt made me open them. The engine was running, lights normal, heater blowing warm air. The lantern was gone. I didn't waste time. I drove, as fast as that stretch would allow. I never took that road again, not alone. And every time I pass near it, I feel that same cold in my bones. Maybe it was just my grief playing tricks. Maybe it was something else. But I can't forget those 3 knocks, or that light that never moved but got closer. So if you're ever out there, past midnight, near the 40th marker between Sombreret and Fresnillo, and you see a lantern on the side of the road, don't stop. That was my story, Mr. Williams. Thank you for letting me share it. And to everyone listening, keep your lights on, your windows up, and don't ignore what your gut tells you. We continue with the next story, the laughter on the shoulder. Good evening, Mr. Williams. My name is Javier, and I'm a truck driver from Villahermosa in Tabasco. I've been listening to your show for years, usually on those long, lonely nights when the darkness on the road feels like it could swallow you whole. My wife is the one who convinced me to write to you. She says I need to get this out, that maybe telling someone else will make the memory less heavy. I'm not so sure, but I'm willing to try. For those of you listening, I suggest you turn down the lights. This isn't a story of monsters with claws, but of something far more unsettling. For over 20 years, I've driven the arteries of Mexico, hauling everything from produce to industrial machinery. I know the roads like the lines on my own hands, the free highways, the toll roads, the shortcuts that shave off an hour but add 10 years to your life. I've seen accidents, federal checkpoints, even standoffs between cartels. I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepares you for the things that hide in the fog, in the places where the modern world's light doesn't reach. This happened about 5 years ago, on a run from Tuxtla Gutierrez to Mexico City. I was carrying a load of coffee, and the client was breathing down my neck. I was already behind schedule, due to a mudslide outside of Ocozocautla, so I was pushing my rig, a tired old Kenworth I called El Valiente, harder than I should have. The route takes you through the Sierra Madre de Chiapas, a beautiful but treacherous stretch of winding mountain roads. That night, the mountains had decided to disappear. A fog, thick and wet as a blanket, had rolled in, reducing visibility to less than 10 feet. My headlights were useless. They just reflected off the white wall in front of me. I was crawling along, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my world reduced to the yellow line I was desperately trying to follow. The air was cold, and the only sounds were the low rumble of my diesel engine and the swish of the wipers. It was around 2 in the morning. I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least an hour. It felt like I was the last man on earth. That's when I saw him, or what I thought was him. On the right shoulder of the road, standing perfectly still, was the silhouette of a small child. My heart jumped into my throat. A kid, out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour. It made no sense. My first thought was an accident. Maybe a car went over the edge, and this poor child was the only survivor. I slammed on the brakes. The air hissed deafening in the silence, and the truck groaned to a halt. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and jumped out, the cold, damp air hitting me instantly. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding weak against the oppressive quiet. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I swept the beam of my flashlight to where I'd seen the figure, but there was nothing there, just the fog, swirling and thick. I took a few steps forward, my boots crunching on the gravel. The beam cut a cone through the mist, illuminating dripping pines and the rusted metal of a guardrail. No child. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept up my spine. I told myself I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. It was a strange rock, a small tree, a shadow, anything but a child. I was about to turn back to my truck when I heard it. Laughter. It was faint, high-pitched, like a little kid giggling, but there was no joy in it. It was cold, mocking. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, sweeping my light in a frantic arc. Nothing. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The laughter answered a little closer this time. That was it for me. I ran back to El Valiente, scrambled into the cab, and slammed the door, locking it behind me. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to rationalize. But the laughter came again, this time right outside my passenger side window. I refused to look. I just threw the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt as I pulled away, much faster than was safe. I drove for what felt like an eternity, my eyes glued to the road ahead, refusing to check my mirrors. The laughter faded, and I started to calm down, my mind desperately searching for a logical explanation. Then, from the sleeper cab behind my seat, I heard a soft giggle. I froze. It was inside the truck. I didn't dare turn around. I could feel a presence there, a cold spot in the air. A small, rhythmic thumping started on the back of my seat, like a child kicking their legs. Thump, 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 thump. I could hear small, quick breaths. Then I felt it. A tiny, ice-cold hand resting on the back of my neck. I screamed. I don't know if any sound came out, but in my head, it was a raw, primal scream. I didn't brake. I didn't slow down. I pushed that old Kenworth to its limit, flying down that mountain road, praying I wouldn't meet a hairpin turn. The fog was still thick, but I didn't care. I would rather fly off the cliff than face what was in my truck with me. The cold touch vanished, and the giggling started again, this time right next to my ear. It was a cruel, ancient sound coming from the throat of a child. I must have driven like that for 20 minutes before I saw the blessed, beautiful glow of lights ahead. It was a 24-hour Pemex station, an oasis of light in the endless dark. I roared into the parking lot, fishtailing to a stop right in front of the convenience store, and bailed out of my cab without even turning off the engine. The attendant, a sleepy-eyed kid, looked at me like I was crazy. I probably was. I stood there in the rain, shaking, staring back at my truck. The cab was empty. The laughter was gone. I stayed there until the sun came up, drinking bitter coffee and refusing to go back to my rig. When dawn finally broke and the fog lifted, I forced myself to check the sleeper. There was nothing there, except for one thing. On the dusty floor behind my seat were two small, perfect footprints, like those of a barefooted child. But they weren't dirty with mud from the road. They were made of something fine and grey, like ash. I've never taken that route through the Sierra de Chiapas again. I'll take the long way around, add a day to my trip, I don't care. Sometimes when I'm on a particularly dark road late at night, I think I hear it. A faint, giggling laugh on the edge of hearing. When I do, I turn the radio up as loud as it will go. Be careful on the roads, my friends. You never know what's waiting on the shoulder. That was my story. Let's keep listening. The Coyote's Gaze. Hello, Mr. Williams and the Roads of Darkness community. My name is Elena, and I live in Jalapa, Veracruz. I'm a graphic designer, a mother, and someone who used to believe that all the old stories were just that, stories. My son Leo is a huge fan of your podcast, and he's the one who urged me to share what happened to us. He says that people should know that the world is older and stranger than we think. So if you're ready, find a comfortable spot and listen to what the sunset can hide in the sugarcane fields. This took place 3 years ago, when Leo was only 7. Every other weekend, I would drive him to his grandmother's house, my mother's place, in a small town near Cardell. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive, through rolling green hills and endless fields of sugarcane that grow so tall they look like solid walls on either side of the highway. It's a beautiful drive, especially in the late afternoon, when the sun sets and paints the sky in shades of orange and purple. That was always my favorite time to drive it. It isn't anymore. On this particular Sunday, we left my mother's house a little late. We'd had a big family meal, and Leo was sleepy and content in his booster seat in the back, playing with a small toy car. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, and the light was golden and thick. I had the windows down, and the air smelled sweet, of sugar and damp earth. It was peaceful. We were about halfway home, on a long, straight stretch of road with cane fields pressing in on both sides when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a stray dog. It was a canine, loping out from between the cane stalks. But as it got closer, I realized it was a coyote. That was strange in itself. They're usually shy and nocturnal. This one was bold, and it was big, much bigger than any coyote I'd ever seen. Its fur was the color of charcoal, and it moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and unnerving. It started running alongside the car, on the gravel shoulder. I was driving about 50 miles per hour, but it kept pace effortlessly, its long legs eating up the ground. Leo noticed it and got excited. "Mami, mira, a doggy," he shouted, pointing out his window. "It's a coyote, mi amor. Stay buckled," I said, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Something felt wrong. It wasn't just its size, it was its eyes. In the fading light, they seemed to glow with a dim, amber light, and they were fixed on us. Not just on the car, but on me. I felt its gaze like a physical touch. There was an intelligence there, a focus that was utterly non-animal. I sped up a little, hoping to leave it behind. The coyote matched my speed instantly, its tongue lolling out, but its breathing wasn't labored. It was like it was just jogging. We drove like that for what must have been 5 miles. This massive, silent animal running parallel to us, its eyes locked on mine. The peaceful atmosphere was gone, replaced by a tense electric dread. The sugarcane fields no longer looked beautiful. They looked like a cage, walling us in. "He's fast, Mummy," Leo said, his voice now a little quieter. The novelty was wearing off for him too. He could feel my fear. "Yes, he is," I managed to say, my own voice tight. I decided I'd had enough. I pushed the accelerator and the car jumped forward, going 60, then 70. The coyote didn't even flinch. It broke into a full-on sprint, a black blur against the darkening landscape, still right outside Leo's window. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It turned its head, still running at full speed, and looked directly at my son. It held his gaze for a second, and then it looked back at me. And I swear, Mr. Williams, I swear it smiled. Its lips pulled back from its teeth in a way that was not a snarl. It was a grin. I let out a small, involuntary cry. I swerved slightly, and the coyote seemed to find this amusing. It then leapt ahead of the car with impossible speed and planted itself directly in the middle of the road, facing us. It just stood there, a dark statue in my headlights. I screamed and wrenched the wheel to the side, my tires screeching as the car half spun onto the shoulder. I slammed on the brakes, and we came to a jarring stop, facing the cane fields. Leo was crying now. I fumbled to get my seatbelt off, my whole body shaking, expecting the creature to be at my window, to crash through the glass. But there was nothing. I looked in my rearview mirror. The road was empty. The coyote was gone. It had vanished as if it had never been there. I sat there for a long time, calming Leo down, trying to get my own breathing under control. I eventually got the car back on the road and drove the rest of the way home in a state of paranoid terror, checking my mirrors every few seconds. We made it home without any other incidents. I tried to forget it, to tell myself it was just a strange animal, that I was overtired. But the next morning, as I was getting ready to take Leo to school, I saw something on the car. On the passenger side door, right below Leo's window, in the layer of dust from the road, was a single, perfect print. It was shaped like a hand, but the fingers were too long, the palm too narrow, and ending in what looked like claw marks. It was the print of something that had rested its hand right there as it ran alongside us. When I told my grandmother what had happened, she wasn't surprised. She lit a candle and made the sign of the cross. She told me we had been seen by a nagual, a sorcerer who has the power to change into an animal. She said it wasn't trying to harm us. It was curious. It was looking at my son, measuring his spirit, she said. I don't know what it wanted, but I know that I will never drive that road at sunset again. We always leave in the bright light of midday now, and I always say a small prayer before we go. Some things are not just stories. They are waiting in the twilight, just beyond the road. That was my experience. Let's hear what else the night has to tell us. The Little Guardians. Hello, community. My name is Marco, and I'm writing to you from Merida in the Yucatan. I work as an assistant for an architectural firm, a job that often sends me to remote construction sites all over the peninsula. I've been a listener since a co-worker put on your podcast during a long drive to a site in Campeche. I never thought I'd be one of the people writing in, but an experience I had last year won't leave my mind. Maybe sharing it will help. So find a quiet place, and I'll tell you why you should always respect the old roads. The Yucatan is a place of contrasts. You have the sprawling, all-inclusive resorts of Cancun and the Riviera Maya, but you drive an hour inland and you're in another world. A world of deep jungle, hidden cenotes, and Mayan ruins that predate written history. The people who live in the small villages there have a different understanding of reality. They know that the jungle, the monte, has owners. I always thought it was just superstition. I was wrong. Last summer, I was tasked with doing a preliminary land survey for a new eco-hotel project near Valladolid. It was a terrible idea, cutting down pristine jungle to build luxury bungalows, but I was just a junior assistant, and my job was to follow orders. The site was deep in the jungle, accessible only by a series of poorly maintained service roads. I was running late. The Yucatan sun was beating down, and the humidity was so thick you could drink it. My car, a cheap sedan with no business being on these roads, was complaining, the AC fighting a losing battle. My GPS had lost its signal miles ago. I was navigating using a set of printed directions, and I came to a fork. The main road, if you could call it that, was rutted and looked half swallowed by the jungle. The other path was a narrow dirt track, barely wide enough for my car, but it looked smoother and seemed to head in the right direction. It was a shortcut. I remembered one of the old-timers at the office telling me, "Never take shortcuts through the Monte, boy. It doesn't like it." I dismissed it as folklore and turned onto the dirt track. The track was smooth for the first few hundred yards, winding through a tunnel of green vines and massive saber trees. The air was still and heavy. The only sounds were the crunch of my tires and the buzz of insects. Then my engine sputtered and died, just like that. No warning, no strange noises. One moment it was running, the next it was silent. I sighed, cursing my luck. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The electronics were dead too. No lights, no radio. I got out of the car, and the heat hit me like a physical blow. I popped the hood, but I'm no mechanic. Everything looked fine to my untrained eye. I stood there, sweating, 100 miles from civilization, with a dead car and no cell service. It was going to be a long walk back. That's when I noticed them. Blocking the path about 20 feet in front of my car were dozens of little stone figures. They were crudely made, looking almost like something a child would sculpt from clay, no more than a foot high. They were arranged in a sort of haphazard barricade across the entire path. I was sure they hadn't been there when I drove in. I would have seen them. I walked closer. They looked ancient, covered in moss and dirt. They depicted small, stout humanoids with large heads and exaggerated features. I figured it must be some kind of local custom, maybe a shrine. Annoyed, I decided to move a few so I could at least roll my car to a better spot. I bent down and grabbed one. It was shockingly heavy, as if it were made of lead, not stone. I could barely lift it. With a grunt, I managed to move one to the side of the path. I was about to move another when a large spider on it made me jump back. I hate spiders. I turned my back on the figures for just a moment to brush myself off, my heart racing from the stupid arachnid. When I turned back, the stone figure I had just moved was back in its original spot. I stared at it, confused. Did I imagine moving it? No, I was sure I had. The sweat was dripping into my eyes. Maybe the heat was getting to me. I decided to try again. I picked up a different one, a real struggle, and placed it carefully at the very edge of the jungle. I kept my eyes on it, not blinking. It stayed put. Feeling a little foolish, I turned to walk back to my car to get some water. I took 3 steps, then glanced back over my shoulder. The statue was back in line with the others. My blood went cold. They were moving. They were moving when I wasn't looking at them. My mind reeled, trying to find a rational explanation. An optical illusion, a prank. But who would be out here, and how? I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the silent, unmoving figures. They seemed to be watching me, their blank stone faces full of a silent challenge. I got back in my car and locked the doors, a completely useless gesture. I sat there shaking, staring at the barricade. I looked down at my hands for a second, just to see if they were trembling as much as I thought. They were. I looked back up. One of the figures was now on the hood of my car. It was just sitting there, its little stone legs crossed, its head cocked to one side. It hadn't made a sound. I hadn't heard a thing. A wave of pure, primal fear washed over me. These things, whatever they were not just moving. They were intelligent, and they did not want me to pass. On pure instinct, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, the lights flashed on, the radio blared static. I didn't question it. I slammed the car into reverse and floored it. The little figure on the hood was gone. I didn't see it fall, I didn't see it jump. It just vanished. I drove backwards down that narrow track at a terrifying speed, scraping the sides of the car against the trees, not caring about the damage. I didn't stop until I was back at the fork in the road. I didn't even pause. I took the main, rutted road and never looked back. When I finally made it to the village near the site, I told my story to an old man who ran the local store. He just nodded slowly, his face grim. He said I had trespassed on the land of the Aluxes, the ancient guardians of the jungle. He said they demand respect and offerings, and that by taking a shortcut without permission, I had angered them. He told me I was lucky they only chose to scare me away. I don't know if I believe in Aluxes, but I can't explain what happened that day. Our firm pulled out of that project, thankfully. I now carry a small pouch with a piece of jade and some honey candy in my glove compartment. The old-timers say it's a good offering, just in case I ever find myself on the wrong road again. That's what I lived through. Let's continue with the stories of the night. The Hitchhiker's Toll. Good evening, Mr. Williams. I'm Ricardo from Puebla. I'm a traveling salesman, mostly dealing in agricultural supplies, so my office is my car, and my territory is the backroads of central Mexico. I've probably heard hundreds of your episodes while driving between small towns late at night. There's one story about a strange hitchhiker that reminded me of something that happened to me in Tlaxcala, and I felt it was time to share it. So, lean in close, and I'll tell you about the time my car broke down and I had to pay a toll that wasn't for the road. Tlaxcala is a small state. but it's full of history and quiet rural landscapes. It can also be incredibly dark at night. The highways that connect the farming communities are often just 2 lanes of asphalt, cutting through vast fields of corn and barley, with no streetlights for miles. It's on one of these roads, between Huamantla and Apizaco, that this story takes place. It was a Tuesday night in late autumn. I'd finished my last sales call and was heading back to my hotel. It had been a long day, and I was tired. The road was empty, and the sky was clear and full of stars. To pass the time, I was listening to the radio, some old cumbia music. Suddenly, the music was replaced by a blast of static. I tried to change the station, but every single one was just white noise. Then my headlights started to flicker, like a dying candle. "Come on, not now," I muttered to my old Nissan Suru. It was a reliable car, but it was getting on in years. As if on cue, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I coasted to the side of the road, the car rolling to a stop in complete and utter darkness. The silence was absolute. I tried to restart the car. The engine wouldn't even turn over. I was stranded. I pulled out my phone. Thankfully, I had a sliver of a signal. I called my insurance company for a tow, and they told me it would be at least an hour. So I settled in to wait. I sat in the dark car for about 10 minutes, the silence starting to get to me. I got out to stretch my legs and stood by the side of the road, looking up at the stars. The air was crisp and cold. That's when I got the feeling, the unmistakable prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you you're being watched. I scanned the darkness around me. I could see the silhouettes of corn stalks in the starlight. Nothing else. I told myself it was just my nerves, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a focused, intense feeling, like a predator watching its prey. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the field. The beam caught nothing but leaves and dirt. Then I pointed it across the road, and that's when I saw him. Standing next to a large pyrrole tree, just at the edge of the light, was a figure. It was short, no taller than a 10-year-old child, but it was stoutly built, with broad shoulders. It was wearing what looked like dark, rustic clothes, and a large, wide-brimmed hat that shadowed its face completely. It was standing perfectly still, just watching me. My first thought was that it was a child, and I felt a surge of alarm. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. The figure didn't respond. It didn't even move. It just stood there, a solid dark shape in the night. A shiver went down my spine. This wasn't a child. The proportions were wrong. The stillness was unnatural. I kept my phone's light on it, not wanting to let it out of my sight. As I watched, I heard a soft whistling sound. It was a simple, tuneless melody, and it seemed to be coming from the figure. A moment later, a small pebble hit the roof of my car with a sharp tink. I jumped. Another pebble hit the hood. It was throwing rocks at me. Not hard, not trying to cause damage, but like a bored kid trying to get a reaction. I slowly backed away and got back into my car, locking the doors. I watched the figure through the windshield. It had taken a few steps forward, still shrouded in shadow by its hat. I could just make out its shape, but no details. The whistling continued, low and eerie. I felt like a bug in a jar, being poked and prodded by something I couldn't understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the blessed sight of headlights coming down the road. It was the tow truck. As it pulled up behind my car, its bright yellow emergency lights illuminated the whole area. I looked back towards the tree. The figure was gone. The tow truck driver, a grizzled old man named Mateo, got out. He looked nervous. "Having trouble?" he asked, his eyes darting around. "Yeah, car's dead," I said. "Hey, did you see a short guy in a big hat standing over there?" Mateo's face went pale. He made a sign to ward off evil and wouldn't look towards the tree. "Don't talk about him," he said in a low voice. He stopped on his stretch of road. "He gets bored." He worked quickly, hooking up my car. He told me that this part of the road was known as the Duende's Crossing. He said a mischievous ancient spirit lived in the fields and liked to play tricks on travelers. Sometimes he would cause breakdowns. Other times he would leave things in the road. "He usually wants a toll," Mateo said, his voice barely a whisper. "An offering, to show respect." "A toll? What kind of toll?" I asked, thinking he was pulling my leg. He wasn't smiling. He went to his truck and came back with a small, unopened bottle of cheap tequila and a pack of cigarettes. He walked to the side of the road, right where the figure had been standing, and placed them carefully at the base of the parul tree. "Let's go," he said, hurrying back to his truck. As we drove away, my car in tow, I looked in the side mirror. In the receding red glow of the tow truck's taillights, I saw the figure step out from behind the tree. It bent down, picked up the bottle and the cigarettes, and tipped its large hat in the direction of our retreating truck before melting back into the darkness. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had anything to offer. Maybe it would have just kept throwing pebbles. Maybe something worse. Now, whenever I have to drive through a particularly dark or lonely stretch of road, I leave a little something on the shoulder. A soda, a piece of sweet bread, a toll, just in case. And now we continue with another testimony. The weight of the Sierra. "Mr. Williams, good evening. My name is Sophia. I'm a student from Monterey, but this story takes place in the mountains of Coahuila. I'm writing this because I need to understand it, and I feel like your community is one of the few places where I won't be told I was hallucinating. What I saw changed me. It ended a relationship and left me with a fear I can't quite name. If you are listening tonight, come with me to the high Sierra, where the silence is older than any sound, and the mountains themselves are watching." 2 summers ago, my boyfriend at the time, Daniel, and I decided to go camping in the Sierra de Arteaga. Daniel was an adventurous type, always pushing for more extreme experiences. I was more hesitant, but I went along with it. He had a beat-up 4x4, and he wanted to explore a remote service road he'd found on a satellite map, one that led to a supposedly pristine, untouched valley. The drive up was beautiful. The air got thinner and cooler as we climbed, leaving the desert heat behind. The road, however, got worse and worse, until it was little more than a rocky trail. Daniel was loving it, whooping as the truck bounced over rocks. I was clutching the dashboard, terrified we were going to break an axle or slide off the edge. And then, of course, we did. Not slide off, but the engine made a horrible grinding noise and died. We were miles from the main road, with no cell service. Daniel, ever the optimist, said it was a great opportunity for a real adventure. He figured we could walk to a small village that was marked on his map, about 10 miles away. I had a very bad feeling about it, a sense of deep unease that settled in my stomach. But the alternative was to stay with the dead truck, so I agreed. We packed some water and snacks and started walking. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set behind the jagged peaks. The scenery was breathtakingly stark. Pine trees clung to rocky cliffs, and the sky was a deep, cloudless blue. But as the sun went down, the beauty started to feel menacing. The shadows grew long and distorted, and an unnatural silence fell over the mountains. The usual sounds of the wilderness, insects, birds, the rustle of small animals, faded away until there was nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of our boots on the gravel. Then came the pressure. It's hard to describe. It was a physical sensation, like the air was becoming thick and heavy, pressing down on us. My ears popped. It became harder to breathe. It felt like we were trespassing, like we had walked into a place where we were not welcome. "Do you feel that?" I whispered to Daniel. "Feel what?" "The altitude," he said, though his own voice was strained. He was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. We kept walking, the feeling of oppression growing with every step. We rounded a bend in the trail, and before us was a wide, open ridge. And standing on that ridge, silhouetted against the last purple light of dusk, was a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, looking more like a distorted shadow than a living thing. It was completely black and seemed to be made of the rock and darkness of the mountain itself. It had long limbs, but no discernible features. No face, no clothes. It was just there, standing perfectly motionless, its form stark against the sky, and it was watching us. We both froze. Every rational thought fled my mind, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching terror. This thing was not human. It was not an animal. It felt ancient, like it had been standing on that ridge since the mountains were born. We could feel its presence, like a wave of cold anger, a silent command to go back. Daniel grabbed my hand and pulled me behind a large boulder. We crouched there, hidden from view, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. "What was that?" Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I breathed. "Don't look." But we did. We peeked over the top of the rock. The figure hadn't moved. It was still there, a sentinel of the night, its presence a crushing weight on the landscape. The pressure was so intense I felt dizzy, nauseous. We stayed hidden behind that rock for hours as total darkness fell. The figure never moved, but we knew it was still there. We could feel its gaze, a silent, malevolent pressure on our minds. We didn't talk, we just held each other, shivering from cold and fear. The silence of the mountain was absolute, profound. It felt like we were the only living things for 100 miles, and we were being judged by the mountain itself. At some point, exhausted and terrified, we must have fallen into a fitful sleep. I woke with a start to the first grey light of dawn. The pressure was gone. The air felt light again. I could hear birds chirping. I looked cautiously over the rock. The ridge was empty. The figure was gone. We didn't wait. We scrambled back the way we came, half running, not looking back. A few hours later, a rancher in a pickup truck found us walking along the main road. He gave us a ride into the nearest town. When we tried to tell him what we saw, he just nodded slowly, his face unreadable. All he said was, "The Sierra keeps its secrets. It doesn't like to be disturbed." That experience was the end for Daniel and me. I couldn't look at him without remembering his reckless arrogance that led us there. I felt that we had angered something ancient, something that should have been left alone. I still have nightmares about that tall, silent figure. I have developed a deep fear of quiet, empty places. I can't go hiking anymore. I need the noise of the city around me. It's a warning I will carry forever. Some places are not for us. And when you feel that you are not welcome, listen, turn around and leave. The procession in the dust. Good evening, Mr. Williams and community. I am Dr. Morales. For the past 15 years, I have been a physician in a small rural clinic in the mountains of Oaxaca. I listen to your program on a small battery-powered radio during the quiet hours of my night shifts. Many of the stories resonate with the strange things one sees and hears in these old, isolated places. I am a man of science, but I have learned that there are things here that science cannot explain. What I am about to tell you happened on a dusty road in the early hours of the morning, a sight that I can still see perfectly when I close my eyes. Please, listen closely, as I tell you about the night I witnessed the silent procession. My clinic serves several small, scattered Zapotec villages. The people here are wonderful, deeply connected to their traditions and the land. They have a rich cosmology that blends Catholicism with their pre-Hispanic beliefs. Life is hard, but there is a profound sense of community. Part of my job involves traveling between these villages, often at odd hours, to attend to emergencies. The roads are mostly unpaved dirt tracks that turn to mud in the rain and clouds of dust in the dry season. This incident occurred about a decade ago, in the pre-dawn hours of a day following a major local festival. It was the feast day of the village's patron saint, and the celebration had lasted for 3 days. I had been awake for nearly 48 hours, dealing with everything from overindulgence to a complicated childbirth. I was bone tired, running on fumes and black coffee, and all I wanted was my bed. I was driving my sturdy but old pickup truck back to my home in the main village. The sky was just beginning to turn from black to a deep indigo, and a pale ghostly light was starting to illuminate the landscape. The road ahead was a ribbon of pale dust winding through fields of agave and corn. I was the only one out. The air was still and cool. As I rounded a long, gentle curve, my headlights fell upon a group of people walking on the road ahead of me. They were walking in the same direction I was headed, in a slow, single-file line. My first thought was that they were pilgrims, or people from the festival heading home. It wasn't unusual to see people walking between villages, even at this hour. I slowed down so as not to startle them or cover them in dust. As I got closer, I began to notice strange details. They were all very short, no taller than children. Each one was wearing a heavy, dark cloak with a deep hood that completely obscured their face and body. They walked with a slow, deliberate, rhythmic gait, their feet making no sound on the dusty road. There were perhaps 20 of them in total. I pulled up slowly beside the line, rolling down my window. "Good morning," I said in Spanish, and then repeated the greeting in the local Zapotec dialect. "Do you need a ride?" None of them turned. None of them acknowledged my presence in any way. They just kept walking, their hooded heads bowed, their pace unchanging. I got a powerful feeling that I was not just being ignored, but that I was completely invisible to them. It was as if I existed on a different plane of reality. I let the truck crawl along beside them, studying them. The cloaks they wore were made of a coarse, dark material, like old wool, and they seemed to absorb the light from my headlights. I tried to see inside their hoods, to catch a glimpse of a face, but there was nothing to see, just a profound, bottomless darkness where a face should be. No eyes, no features, nothing. A deep, instinctual fear began to prickle at my skin. These were not people. They were not children. The silence was what was most terrifying. There was no shuffling of feet, no coughing, no breathing, just the low rumble of my truck's engine and the silent, inexorable forward movement of the procession. They carried no lanterns, no candles, yet they walked with perfect purpose in the dim light. I drove alongside them for a few hundred feet, my scientific mind racing to find an explanation. A strange religious sect, a forgotten local custom. But nothing could explain the unnerving silence, the faceless voids under the hoods, the chilling indifference to my presence. They felt ancient, like a ceremony that had been repeated on this road for 1,000 years. I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed on the accelerator and drove past the procession, my heart pounding in my chest. I did not dare to look in my rearview mirror until I was at least a mile down the road. When I finally did, the road behind me was empty. They were gone. The next day, I cautiously asked a few of the village elders about what I had seen. I described the procession in detail. One of them, a wise old curandera named Elodia, looked at me with serious eyes. She told me that on certain nights, when the veil between the worlds is thin, the antiguos, the old ones, walk the land. She said they are the spirits of the first people, the guardians of the earth. They are not evil, she explained, but they belong to a different time, and to see them is to be reminded that our world is just a thin layer on top of something much older and deeper. She warned me that seeing them is an omen, a sign that you have looked into a place you were not meant to see. I am a man of medicine and logic. I treat illnesses with antibiotics and set bones with plaster. But I have no explanation for what I saw on that dusty road. I still drive those roads at all hours, but now I do so with a new sense of respect and a little bit of fear. I know that I share this land with things that my science cannot measure. My advice to you is this: if you are ever on a lonely road at the edge of night and day, and you see something you don't understand, don't question it. Just keep driving, and pray it doesn't see you too. The road that repeats. Hey, Mr. Williams. Hey, community. Name's Carlos. I play bass for a cumbia band out of Durango. We're not famous or anything, but we get by, playing weddings, quinceañeras, town fairs. You know the drill. Our job means a lot of late nights and a lot of driving on some of the most notorious roads in Mexico. I've heard guys on your show talk about seeing ghosts on the highway, but what happened to us was different. It was weirder. It was like the road itself was alive, and it decided to play a trick on us. If you're settled in, I'll tell you about the night we got trapped on the Devil's Spine. The road between Durango and Mazatlan is officially Highway 40, but everyone calls it the Espinazo del Diablo. It's a spectacular and terrifying piece of engineering, twisting and turning through the Sierra Madre Occidental. On one side you have a solid rock wall, on the other a drop of thousands of feet. There are crosses and little shrines dotting the whole route, marking the places where people weren't so lucky. It's a road that demands respect. We were driving back from a gig in a small town on the Sinaloa side. It was late, maybe 3 in the morning. There were 4 of us packed into our old van. Hector, our singer and leader, a guy in his 60s who had seen it all, Memo on the accordion, Luis on percussion, and me on bass, taking my turn to drive. The guys were asleep in the back, and the only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the low whistle of the wind through the mountains. I was tired but focused. You have to be on that road. I knew we were making good time when we passed a familiar landmark, a small, brightly painted shrine to the Virgin of Guadalupe, built into a curve of the rock face. There was a little pull-off area next to it where people leave flowers and candles. Seeing it meant we were about an hour away from the flatter lands near Durango. I felt a sense of relief. I drove on, concentrating on the endless curves. The road is hypnotic at night, just a snake of asphalt illuminated by your headlights. About 15 minutes later, I rounded a sharp bend, and there it was. The little shrine to the Virgin, bright and clear in my headlights. I blinked. I must have been more tired than I thought. Maybe it was a different shrine that just looked similar. But no, I was sure. The arrangement of the plastic flowers, the specific crack in the rock above it, it was the same one. I shook my head, chalking it up to fatigue. But then, another 10 or 15 minutes of driving through the winding darkness, and I came around another curve. And there it was, again, the exact same shrine. This time a cold dread washed over me. I wasn't mistaken. We were driving forward, burning gas. The odometer was ticking up, but we weren't getting anywhere. We were trapped. "Hey, Hector," I said, my voice shaking a little. "Wake up." Hector stirred in the passenger seat. "What's wrong, kid?" "That shrine, the one to the Virgin. We've passed it 3 times. He sat up, suddenly wide awake, and peered out the windshield. "What are you talking about?" "I'm serious. We keep passing the same spot." He didn't believe me at first. He told me to keep driving, so I did. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. We drove in tense silence for another few minutes, and then we rounded a curve, and the shrine came into view for the fourth time. Memo and Luis were awake now, sensing the panic in the van. "Okay, this isn't funny," Luis said from the back. "What is going on?" "The road has us," Hector said, his voice grim. He was staring at the shrine as we passed it yet again. "My grandfather used to tell me stories. Sometimes the roads, the old roads, they get playful. They don't let you leave." We tried everything. I stopped the van. We all got out. The air was cold and thin. We looked back. The road was empty. We looked forward. The road was empty. There were no turn-offs, no other paths. We got back in. I tried turning around and driving back the way we came. After a few minutes, we passed the shrine again, now on our left side. We turned around and went forward once more. A short while later, there it was. The shrine. Panic was really setting in. The radio was just static. Our phones had no signal. We were in a loop, a pocket of time and space that just kept repeating. It felt like the mountain was laughing at us. Hector, who knew all the old ways, suddenly had an idea. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice firm. "Do exactly as I say. We're going to break the enchantment." He told us all to take off our shirts and put them back on inside out. It felt ridiculous, but we were desperate, so we did it. Then he had us say a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, but we had to say it backwards. It was difficult and felt deeply sacrilegious, stumbling over the words. When we were done, Hector nodded. "Okay, Carlos, drive. Don't go fast. Don't go slow. Just drive steady. And whatever you do, don't look at the shrine when we pass it this time. Stare at the road ahead." I put the van in gear and started driving. My heart was pounding. We approached the familiar curve. I could feel the shrine coming up on my right. I fought every instinct to look, keeping my eyes locked on the yellow line in the middle of the road. We drove past the spot in silence. We kept driving. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. The road started to look different. The curves felt new. We didn't see the shrine again. After about half an hour, we saw the distant lights of a small town. We were out. We were free. We all started shouting and laughing with relief. We never talked about what happened that night. It was like an unspoken agreement. But we all knew it was real. I believe Hector was right. The road itself, or something in it, trapped us. A spirit, an energy, a joke played by something ancient. The Devil's Spine earned its name that night. It's a road with a memory and a sense of humor. And if you're not careful, it might just invite you to stay for a while. The thirst of the mine. Hello, Mr. Williams. My name is Anna, and I'm a geology postgraduate student from San Luis Potosi. My studies often take me to strange and remote places, old mining districts, and forgotten corners of the desert. I've always been a rational person, someone who believes that everything has a scientific explanation. An experience near the ghost town of Real de Catorce, however, challenged everything I thought I knew. I listened to your show while analyzing rock samples late at night, and I feel this is the right place to tell my story. I invite you and your listeners to come with me to a place where the earth itself has guardians, and they do not like to be disturbed. Real de Catorce is a fascinating place. It's a former silver mining town high in the Sierra de Catorce, surrounded by a stark, beautiful desert. In its heyday, it was fabulously wealthy, but when the price of silver crashed, it became a virtual ghost town. Today, it's a tourist destination, known for its mystical energy, in part because the Wixárika, or Huichol people, consider it a sacred site. For my thesis, I was studying the unique mineral formations in the old abandoned mines around the town. These mines are dangerous and mostly sealed off, but I had permits to access the areas around some of the more remote shafts to collect surface samples. One afternoon, I drove my Jeep down a rough, unpaved track that led towards an old mine named La Purissima. It was known for producing incredibly pure silver ore. The road was barely a road, and a sign riddled with bullet holes warned against trespassing. My permit gave me the right to be there, but the place felt off. The air grew heavy and still, and there was a strange metallic smell, like ozone right before a thunderstorm. I parked my Jeep about 100 yards from the main mine entrance, a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain, boarded up with thick, weathered timbers. As I got out, the feeling of being watched was immediate and intense. I was completely alone. The desert was silent, except for a low hum that seemed to be coming from the ground itself. It was a deep, resonant frequency that I could feel in the soles of my feet. I pulled out my geological compass to take a bearing, and that's when things got truly strange. The needle was spinning wildly, rotating in a smooth, continuous circle. It was useless. I'd heard of magnetic anomalies near ore deposits, but nothing like this. It was as if the laws of physics were being bent. Then I heard another sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was the sound of a miner's pickaxe hitting rock, and it was coming from deep within the sealed-off mine. I froze, listening. It couldn't be. The mine had been closed for a century. Locals sometimes explored the more accessible tunnels, but this one was considered unstable and was securely boarded up. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. A cold sweat broke out on my skin despite the desert heat. I took a few cautious steps towards the mine entrance, my scientific curiosity battling with a growing sense of dread. As I got closer, the humming from the earth grew louder, and that's when I saw them. Scrambling out from a small gap between the rotting timbers of the entrance were figures. They were small, no more than 2 or 3 feet tall, and seemed to be made of the very dirt and rock of the mountain. Their bodies were humanoid, but lumpy and misshapen, the color of dry earth and oxidized stone. They moved with a jerky, insect-like quickness. They had no discernible faces, just 2 points of light for eyes that glowed with a faint, internal luminescence, like raw, uncut minerals. There were dozens of them. They swarmed out of the mine and spread out, forming a silent perimeter around the entrance. They did not approach me. They just stopped and watched me, their heads cocked with an unnerving, alien curiosity. The tapping from within the mine had stopped. I was paralyzed with a fear so absolute it felt like my heart had ceased to beat. My brain, the scientist's brain, was trying to process what I was seeing. A strange desert animal, hallucinations from the altitude, but I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that these creatures were real. They were the source of the humming, the guardians of the mine. One of the creatures, standing slightly in front of the others, took a step forward. It held up one of its lumpy, dirt-caked hands. In its palm, it held a piece of dull, grey rock. As I watched, mesmerized, the rock began to change. A web of shining silver veins spread across its surface, growing brighter and brighter until the entire rock gleamed like a polished mirror. It held the perfect piece of silver up for me to see, a treasure from the heart of the mountain. Then, slowly, it closed its hand, and the silver crumbled into grey dust, which trickled through its fingers and back to the earth. It was not an act of aggression. It was a demonstration, a message. This belongs to us. What we create, we can destroy. It is not for you. I understood. I slowly began to back away, never taking my eyes off them. Their glowing eyes followed my every move. I got into my Jeep, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I started the engine, put it in reverse, and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I abandoned my research in that area. I changed the focus of my thesis. I never told my professors what I saw. They would have had me psychologically evaluated. But I know what I saw. The Wixárika people believe that the mountains, the rocks, the desert, they all have spirits. The old miners used to call them gomesilos, earth spirits, that guarded the mineral veins. They said you had to leave them offerings, tobacco and tequila, or they would lead you to your doom in the dark tunnels. I believe the thirst for silver, the greed that built and then destroyed Real de Catorce, has made those guardians permanently hostile. They remain there, in the darkness, tapping away in the deep places of the earth, protecting the treasures that drove men mad. Some places, and their riches, are best left undisturbed. The curve of the three crosses. Good evening, Señor Williams and Comunidad de Carreteras de la Oscuridad. My name is Daniel. I drive a small freight truck that runs from Cuauhtémoc up through San Juanito to the orchards near Basasachi in Chihuahua. I've listened to your episodes for years while waiting in loading yards, but it was an episode about a curve in the mountains that finally pushed me to write. I've kept this to myself because I still don't know what part of it I caused and what part was already set in motion. Turn off the lights and let the road noise settle, and come with me to the Sierra Tarahumara at the end of a long day. It was late October, almost Dia de Muertos. The air had that dry, high country cold that burns your nose when you breathe. A front had blown in, and it was dusk when I left San Juanito with the bed half full of apple crates and sacks of pinole for a ranchito past Basasachi. I'd slept badly the night before. The smell in the cab was old coffee, pine resin from a board I'd hauled earlier, and the kind of stale sweat that sits in the seatbelt. I told myself I'd drive carefully and be done before midnight. The highway there is a ribbon sliced into the slope, blacktop patched with grey scars of older repairs. When the fog comes in, it tastes like cold metal. As I climbed, I could hear distant cowbells and the thin whine of my fan belt, and the radio was mostly static, with a few rancheras from a station out of Guerrero. The world narrowed to the swish of tires and the dull thud of expansion joints. I passed a handful of roadside altars, the little white houses with plastic flowers and glass candles fogged over inside. You know the type. In that country, the dead ride with you whether you invite them or not. There's a place the old drivers still call La Curva de las Tres Cruces. 3 white crosses hammered into a slope of red earth beneath a stand of pines. 20 years ago, a pickup went over there. A family, the story says. The crosses stay fresh, always repainted by someone, always with new ribbons that flap in the wind like moths. I don't know who keeps them that way, but whoever they are, they're faithful. I hit that section around 9 at night. The fog had thickened into something like breath on a mirror. The road was damp, my wipers whispering, rhythm like a slow clock. Every now and then the heater coughed and filled the cab with warm, dusty air, and I realized how tired I was. Tired means loose hands, and loose hands mean mistakes, so I leaned forward and cracked the window. The smell of wet pine drifted in with a draft so cold it felt like a hand on my face. A shape stepped from the shoulder and lifted an arm. I don't mean it waved. I don't mean it lunged. The arm came up like it had been doing that forever, palm down, a simple press towards the asphalt. Slow down. The face was a blur in the fog, and there was no color in it, just the dark mass of a coat and the sense of wet fabric clinging to bone. It was the economy of the gesture that made my stomach drop. No drama, no surprise. A motion repeated for years. My foot came off the accelerator. Muscle memory did its work. I eased the brake. The cargo shifted. A crate thumped the rail. The truck straightened itself like a horse under a rider. I glanced in the side mirror out of habit, looking for headlights behind me, but the world was grey and slick and empty. At 5 meters, the figure wasn't in front of me anymore. I hadn't seen it step aside. It was just gone. The fog swirled as if a body had just passed through it. My heart was beating in my mouth. I told myself it was a Tarahumara runner cutting across the road, or a hiker, or a trick of the light. And then I saw the sheen ahead. Thin threads of water crossing the asphalt, where a little arroyo normally stays dry. I downshifted. The engine protested. The truck nosed into the turn and the steering went light under my hands for a breath's worth of seconds. The right rear skated. The bed shuddered. I could feel the tires skating on a film I hadn't seen. Black ice? No, not at that temperature. Just a slick, old oil lifted by the drizzle, something that makes asphalt into a mirror. The guardrail flashed pale, and for a second I was looking into my own window reflection. A ghost with my face. I made the turn. On the far side, my chest went hollow with that sudden, stupid gratitude you have when you've almost been humiliated by physics and somehow weren't. I coasted 10 car lengths to let the adrenaline drain. My hands trembled on the wheel. The heater breathed its dusty heat and the smell of pine returned. I told myself again it was nothing. Then the radio clicked. I hadn't touched it. It had been crackling with static for 20 minutes, but this was a clean click like a finger tapping the knob. The speaker hissed and then emptied out, and all that remained was the sound of my tires and the occasional ping of gravel. The fog thinned for a moment, and that's when I saw the 3 crosses down the slope. Fresh white, with ribbons and a little enamel coffee cup at the foot of the middle one. The cup was new. The shine of it was wrong for night. A pinprick of candlelight flickered inside the little house built around them. Someone had been there that day. I pulled over. Don't ask me why. Maybe I wanted to leave something because I had been spared. Maybe guilt always smells like incense. I carried a pocket rosary looped around my turn signal stalk. A gift from my sister. The beads were cheap black plastic, the crucifix worn smooth. I took it, slid down the gravel, and stood in the red mud among the pines. The fog hung in stringy curtains between trunks. Somewhere a cow coughed, and the cowbell answered like a question. Up close, the crosses were not perfectly white. Whoever had painted them had missed spots at the bottoms, and the earth splash had already flecked them. There were the ribbons and a tiny photo in plastic, gone cloudy with damp, and that cup. Inside it, a little heap of coins had collected, sticky with the sugar from a melted candy. I put the rosary around the middle cross and said nothing. I'm not a religious man. I felt watched and not by eyes. When I scrambled back up, the fog peeled apart for a heartbeat, and a man stood by my truck on the shoulder. He wasn't facing me. He stood with his back to the road, feet set, head tilted toward the curve I had just taken, one hand lifted, palm down. Slow down. The gesture was the same. The coat hung heavy and dark with wet. A trickle of water trailed from the cuff like a vein. He never turned. He never acknowledged me. He waited for someone else coming the other way that never came. I climbed into the cab and shut the door quietly, like in a church. The cab smelled like wet wool now, though nothing inside was wet. The radio clicked again and flooded back with static, and a thin voice from far away talking about prayers in some parish where the bell sounded like a spoon in a glass. I drove on. After Basasachi, I pulled into a loncheria with a tin roof and bright bulbs. The woman behind the griddle poured me coffee that tasted like smoke and cinnamon. I told her I'd seen someone at the curve. She wiped her hands on her apron and nodded once, no surprise in it. "They're always there when it gets wet," she said, and set a plate of gorditas in front of me. "People learn or they don't." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't mention the rosary. I didn't say that I could still feel cold on the side of my face, where the night air had entered, as if a palm had rested there. I passed that curve monthly. The rosary stays on my rearview mirror now. I replaced it with a different one on the cross the following week, because I couldn't stand how bare my cab felt without it. Every time the weather turns, I slow down well before the fog thickens, and I watch the shoulder without pretending I'm not. I've never seen the man again, not directly. I have seen the way the fog moves along that shoulder, like someone's body is going through it. My advice to anyone on that route is simple. If you see a hand on the mountain lift and press, do as it says. The dead don't always want you with them. Sometimes they're tired of the company. That was my story. Let's keep the headlights low and continue with the next testimony. Mud on the radio. "Hello, Senor Williams. Hello, Comunidad. I'm Luisa, paramedic out of Santiago Tuxtla in Veracruz. When storms pin the coast and the mangroves breathe that warm rot, we get calls from ranchos along the road to Catemaco and down towards Sontocomapan. The night I'm writing about, I'd just finished listening to one of your episodes on my phone, something about a curve by a lagoon, and I thought I was too tired to dream. I'm writing because I don't know if we saved a life by ourselves or because something older pointed with its whole body. Turn off the lights and imagine a flashlight's ring on brown water." It was August, thickness in the air like a wet towel. The ambulance smelled like antiseptic and rubber and the lemon cleaner we used on the stretcher. My partner, Chucho, had that smell of rain-soaked uniform that's part mildew, part metal. We'd been bouncing from clinic to clinic since the afternoon. Frogs sang from ditches like a crowd after a goal. The radio chirped and spat, and then the dispatcher put us on a call, possible rollover near a rancho off the 2-lane, direction of Tres Zapotes. No answer from the caller afterward. A hang-up, maybe a pocket dial. The highway there glazes itself in storms. Heavy trucks smear diesel into the pores, the palms drip. The mango stands shut their metal doors, and the smell of ripe fruit turns into something sweet and sour that sticks in the back of your throat. As we took the turn at the shrine to San Judas, candles drowned in their own wax, smoke filling the glass like fog. I felt a little chill that made no sense in that heat. I clicked the AC to defrost, just to have something to do with my hands. We drove slow. The rain went from sheets to ropes to beads and back again. The windshield wipers made a metronome for my thoughts, and my thoughts were stupidly domestic. I was thinking about my mother's kitchen, the sound of a radio reading the rosary, the smell of café de olla spiced heavy, and how I'd promised to buy her new jars for sugar because the lids rust. When the call came in, those thoughts stalled like a paper caught in a fan. On the right shoulder near a break in the cane stood a row of candles, little flames under glass jars, a dozen perhaps, their light simple and unwavering in the rain. No one was near them. No car was parked. The mud by the shoulder was churned in a way that said people had stood there earlier, feet turning, talking, waiting. Now it was empty. We slowed across from it. Chucho leaned forward and said nothing. He reached down to lower the radio volume, and his fingers came away dirty with a grit that hadn't been there 5 seconds ago. He rubbed his thumb and forefinger and frowned. The smell of wet earth rose strong and close in the cab. I stepped out with the flashlight, rain hissing on the road. The candles burned behind their fogged glass like eyes half closed in prayer. The mud at my feet was dark, almost black, clotted with cane leaves and something that might have been a ribbon. My beam found footprints, bare feet, small ones. The toes pressed deep and then shallowed, like someone had stood and shifted their weight, and beside them, heel marks from a larger person who had knelt. There's a posture that speaks even when the body is gone. Kneeling, leaning in, the angle of a spine that says attention, not grief. I followed those prints to the ditch. Water moved there, slow, brown, duckweed gathered in the corners like sleeping insects. Something pale lay below the surface, a shape that the water made and unmade. At first I thought it was a bag. Then I realized it was the roof of a car just below the waterline, a breath held. We called it in. Chucho ran for the hook and line. The rain softened to a mist that hung in my eyelashes. I waded into the ditch to feel along the car, my boots giving up their seal and swallowing the mud like meat. My hands found the edge of a window. It was closed, the glass cold. Inside, a blur of a face turned toward me, hair floating like a water plant. I knocked with my maglite and the eyes widened. Alive. There wasn't time to think about who had placed the candles or why they were so steady. There's a blur that takes you when training is all that sits between two heartbeats. We hooked the rear axle and used the truck's slow pull to pivot the car so the driver's side rose. The window was locked. I jammed the window punch into the corner and felt that insect-sharp tingle up my arm when glass becomes a web. Water rushed. A hand reached, and I closed around a wrist so cold it felt boneless. We pulled her out. A woman in her 30s, white knuckles, lips blue in a place where August doesn't give blue away for free. She coughed canal water and bile, and an apology to no one. I stripped the thermal blanket from the bench and tucked her like a child. The rain blew sideways and stopped with the arrogant suddenness of the coast. Chucho shouted that he could see another shape in the back seat, but it was a pile of clothes, a child's booster, empty. The ditch gave us only one person that night. We loaded her. I climbed in back with her while Chucho drove, and the radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice. Distant, calm, the way someone gets when they're reading the end of a prayer. That would have been the end of it, a rescue in the margins, if not for two things. One was the way the mud kept appearing on our radio, on the volume knob, on the faceplate. I wiped it more than once with a towel, and it returned in the shape of fingertips. The other was the woman's eyes whenever the ambulance passed a roadside altar. Her gaze flicked to the glass houses and their damp candles as if counting. When I asked her soft questions, the day, her name if she had pain, she nodded and coughed and tried, but when I almost asked, "Were you alone?" something in her face closed like a window against rain. I didn't force it. At the hospital in Santiago, a nurse with salt still on her neck from a day at the Gulf took her name and called her family. Later we learned she'd been coming back from a velorio driving slow because she'd stayed too late. She didn't remember the ditch and didn't remember lighting any candles. Her brother came and took off his hat and cried in that quiet, angry way men do when they've held up the roof for a long time. We went back out an hour later because we had to retrieve our line. The candles were still there, burned down little by little, wax pooling white inside the jars. The footprints had blurred. Something had been left on the shoulder, a tiny pair of blue sandals, their plastic straps slick with rain. They were clean inside, as if never worn. I didn't touch them, neither did Chucho. Sometimes when the rain starts up on the coast and the frogs make their music, our radio hisses with a sound that isn't voices, just the hush of water moving where water shouldn't. The volume knob will be damp, and we'll wipe it, and it will be damp again. I don't say anything then. I look out at the road and remember the posture by the ditch, the angle of a spine repeating a gesture learned the hard way. Kneel, lean, show the living where to look. If you ever see candles where no one stands, stop. If you see small prints at the edge of a ditch, look down. The dead on the roads don't ask for words. they ask for attention. That's my account, Senor Williams. And now, let's keep going with another voice from the night. The white line on La Rumorosa. I am Hector, a tow operator out of Tecate, Baja California. 15 years on the grade of La Rumorosa, I've picked up more radiators and brake shoes than I can count. Hauled people who fell asleep with their windows down and the desert dust inside their mouths. Everyone here talks about the wind like a living thing. They're right. I'm writing because of a shift last winter when the white line itself seemed to move, and someone on that line moved with it. Lights off, doors locked. Listen to the wind press the doors like a palm. It was January, that desert cold that makes the stars feel closer and meaner. The night smelled of hot brakes and creosote. I'd had a late dinner at a loncheria in La Cuesta. Machaca, tortillas stiffening at the edges by the time I remembered to eat them. And I had a thermos of coffee in the cab that tasted like whoever washed the pot used soap that never quite leaves. The radio from Mexicali carried a baseball recap, and then nothing but dry air. A call came in at 1:12 a.m. A sedan had stalled 2 curves above El Condor, no damage reported, just a refusal to start. Any driver on La Rumorosa knows a stall can turn into a skid when a gust finds you, so I rolled fast but careful, my high beams cutting chalk marks on the rock. The white line on that grade is no longer white. It's a scab color, scraped and repainted and scraped again by 1,000 chains, 1,000 jacks. In the dark, it glows anyway, the way bone does when you think of what's beneath skin. Tonight it did something I haven't seen before or since. It wavered. Not the way heat bends air. This was like breath over a mirror. As I took the last turn before the stalled car, the wind died. That alone sets your teeth on edge on La Rumorosa. Silence is not a neutral thing there. My headlights found the sedan on the shoulder, hazard lights clicking their metronome. A woman stood beside it in a quilted jacket, arms wrapped around herself. Her face was pinched and embarrassed, the way people get when machines betray them. I pulled in behind, set my triangles, and nodded hello. Her lips moved. I didn't hear her. The wind found its voice again and shoved the truck. "Get back in the car," I said, pointing, and she did. I slid on gloves and reached for the hood latch. The metal was colder than it should have been, like the engine didn't give off heat. Under the hood, things looked normal, until I saw a fine film of dust coating everything in a neat, even layer, as if time had passed here in the span of a stall. I followed the cable to the battery, touched the terminal, and felt grit grind under my fingertip. When I raised my hand, my glove was smudged not with dust, but chalky white like the line from the edge of the road. The white line had shifted. I looked up and saw it not where it should be, but a palm's width into the lane, drawn by a drunk painter, and on that displaced line stood a man, not facing me, not facing anything, standing with his boots straddling the paint, head tilted toward the valley, one hand lifted palm flat, holding an invisible weight. The posture was taut without being dramatic. My mind tried to resolve him into a reflector post, or a bush caught in the glare. My heart knew a posture I'd seen twice before, in another life. A person standing between impact and someone else. I stepped into the lane. The wind hadn't decided to push again, but the air felt like a lung being filled. The man didn't move. I couldn't see his face. The jacket on him was dark and stiff, a style from 10 years ago. There was a seam across the shoulders that I recognized and couldn't place. The line beneath his boots seemed to throb, and a fine powder drifted from his heels, the same chalk that had smeared my glove. A semi's horn blew below us, not close, warning someone invisible around a bend. The woman in the sedan tapped her window. I turned back to indicate stay, and when I turned again, He was no longer in front of me. He was a step farther up the grade, the hands still lifted, the body angled against a gust that hadn't yet arrived. He did not look at me. He was not there for me. He was plotting a path out of accidents, step by step. There is a place on that stretch where a bus went over in '99. Old heads tell the story quiet, like a sin. The wind or bad brakes or a nodding driver, each version different. People leave flowers on the fence. Last year, someone tied a red ribbon that the wind has not managed to steal. Right where that ribbon flapped without moving, the man's hand pressed the air, and the white line smudged grey as if rubbed by a sleeve. The sedan's hood creaked in my hand. I looked down and saw the battery cable sway through my fingers were still. The engine coughed, choked, then caught with a sound like someone clearing grit from their throat. I slammed the hood and signaled the woman to start it. She turned the key. The car came alive. Her shoulders dropped in relief so pure it made my eyes sting. She lowered the window to say thank you, and a gust slammed against us, hard enough to stagger me and push my triangles an inch. The wind screamed then, La Rumorosa's animal voice. It pulled at my jacket and tried to take my hat. I turned to find the man again and saw only the line, back where it belonged, steady and ugly and true. The chalk on my glove had marked the edge of the hood in a neat hand impression. I brushed it. It didn't smear. Don't stop until you get to the tolls, I told the woman. No pictures, no calls, both hands. She nodded too fast. Tears in her eyes she didn't understand, and merged into the lane like someone stepping into cold water. On the way down, my radio filled with a thin, high whine, not quite feedback, not quite wind, something like a fork rubbed on glass. It hurt my teeth. It cut off near El Hongo like a lid closing. At the yard, I used the sink to wash my hands, but the chalk was stubborn in the creases. When I finally scraped it out with my thumbnail, the smell that came up was not dust. It was something like heated rubber and old incense. Drivers ask me what to look for up there at night. Look for silence where wind belongs. Look for a hand that holds the air as if it were heavy. If you see it, you don't need to know the story behind it. You just need to obey it. That's my piece, Senor Williams. Let the next engine idle and the night keep going. The Glimmering Man. Good evening, Mr. Williams, and to the entire Roads of Darkness community. My name is Ismael, and I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've spent the better part of 30 years crisscrossing every inch of Mexico, from the jungles of Chiapas to the border towns up north. My son, who's also a fan of your show, is the one who convinced me to write this down. He said the story I told him about the Sonoran Desert years ago sounded a lot like some of the accounts you've shared. He told me, "Dad, maybe someone else has seen it. Maybe you're not the only one." So here I am, hoping he's right. For those of you listening, I invite you to find a comfortable spot. Turn off the lights and just listen to the sound of my voice. Picture the road, the endless ribbon of asphalt under a sky full of stars. That's where my life happens, and that's where this story begins. It was back in the late 90s. I was younger, more reckless, and running a load of electronics from Nogales down to Hermosillo. It was a straight shot, a familiar route, but this was mid-July. If you know Sonora, you know what that means. Heat. Not just heat, but a suffocating, shimmering blanket of it that presses down on you, that distorts the world. The sun beats on the pavement until the road itself seems to sweat, and the air wavers and dances in the distance, creating mirages of water where there is only scorched earth. I was driving my old Kenworth, a beast of a machine without air conditioning. My only relief was the two side windows rolled down, funneling hot air that felt like a blast furnace against my skin. The cab smelled of diesel, stale coffee, and the cheap pine tree air freshener dangling from my rearview mirror. I was tired. I'd been pushing for 12 hours straight, trying to make good time, fueled by lukewarm soda and a determination that bordered on foolishness. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The desert at dusk is a beautiful, treacherous thing. The saguaros stand like silent sentinels, their arms raised to the heavens, and the shadows grow long and twisted, playing tricks on your eyes. I was on a particularly desolate stretch of Federal Highway 15, a two-lane road with nothing but sand, rock, and thorny brush for miles in every direction. The loneliness of that place is profound. It gets inside you. You feel like the last man on earth. That's when I first saw him. At first, it was just another trick of the light, another heat mirage. Far down the road, where the asphalt seemed to melt into the sky, a figure appeared. It was tall and unnaturally thin, shimmering with the same intensity as the air around it. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. It was common to see illusions out there, pools of water, phantom cars. But this was different. It had a distinctly human shape. As I drove closer, the figure remained, not fading or dissolving as a mirage should. It just stood there, right in the middle of my lane. My heart began to beat a little faster. My rational mind, the mind of a seasoned trucker, told me it was a person in distress, someone whose car had broken down, desperate for help. But another part of me, a deeper, more primal instinct, screamed that something was wrong. The figure didn't wave its arms. It didn't move at all. And the shimmering, it wasn't just the heat. It looked as if the person was made of liquid light, of molten glass. I slowed the truck, the engine groaning in protest. I was still a few hundred meters away, but the details were becoming clearer, and they made no sense. The figure had no discernible features, no face, no clothes, no hair. It was just a silhouette of a man, glowing with a blinding internal light, like a filament in a light bulb. The heat radiating from it was so intense I could feel it through the windshield, a wave of warmth that had nothing to do with the desert sun. It was a dry, electric heat that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I pulled the truck over to the shoulder, about 50 meters from the thing, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a symptom of fatigue and dehydration. I took a long drink from my water bottle, splashing some on my face. When I looked up again, it was still there. And then it moved. It didn't walk. It glided, floating a few inches above the asphalt, moving toward my truck with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly inhuman. A cold dread, colder than any winter night in the Sierra, washed over me. This was not a person, this was something else. My mind raced. I fumbled for the keys, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. I had to get out of there. I turned the ignition, and the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I tried again. Nothing. Just a weak, pathetic clicking sound. The battery was dead. But it couldn't be. It was a new battery. I'd just had the whole system checked. The shimmering man was closer now, maybe 20 meters away. The light it emitted was so bright it hurt to look at, yet it cast no shadow. It was a being of pure, silent energy. I could feel a strange pressure building in the cab, a low hum that vibrated in my teeth and bones. It felt like the air before a lightning strike. I locked the doors, a useless gesture that offered no comfort. It stopped directly in front of my grill, hovering there, its form wavering like a candle flame in a draft. I was paralyzed, trapped in my metal box, staring into the heart of something impossible. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. My entire world had shrunk to that cab and the terrifying, radiant being outside it. It tilted its head, a gesture that was shockingly, eerily human. It was as if it were curious, studying me, looking right through the metal and glass, right into my soul. I don't know how long I sat there, locked in that silent confrontation. It could have been seconds or hours. Time had lost all meaning. All I knew was the blinding light, the oppressive heat, and the soul-crushing certainty that I was about to die. I thought of my wife, my son. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. When I opened them again, it was gone. The road was empty. The desert was silent. The last vestiges of sunlight were fading from the sky. For a long moment I didn't move, convinced it was another trick. But the heat was gone. The humming had stopped. I was alone. With a trembling hand, I reached for the ignition, and on the first try, the engine roared to life as if nothing had happened. I didn't wait. I threw the truck in gear and stomped on the accelerator, not caring about the cargo or the company or anything else. I just drove, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting to see that shimmering light following me. But there was nothing. I didn't stop until I reached the first brightly lit truck stop in Hermosillo. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs like jelly, and I was sick right there on the pavement. Another driver came over to ask if I was okay. I probably looked like I'd seen a ghost. I couldn't tell him what happened. What could I say? That I'd met a man made of light in the middle of the desert? They would have thought I was crazy or on drugs. I've never driven that stretch of road at dusk again. If I have to, I'll wait until the sun is high in the sky, or I'll join a convoy of other trucks. I've heard stories since then, whispers from other old-timers about strange lights on Highway 15, about drivers who see things in the heat. They talk about a worker who was electrocuted during the construction of the highway, his body incinerated in an instant. They say he's still out there, drawn to the electrical systems of passing vehicles. I don't know if that's true. All I know is what I saw. It left a mark on me, a deep, abiding fear of the empty spaces and the tricks the light can play. So if you're ever driving through the desert as the sun goes down, and you see a strange light shimmering on the road ahead, don't stop. Don't be a hero. Just keep driving and pray your engine doesn't fail. Some things aren't meant to be understood. That was my story. Let's keep listening. The Weeper of the Ravine. Hello, Senor Williams. My name is Eleanor. I'm writing to you from Oaxaca City, where I work as a graphic designer. I've been a silent listener of your podcast for a couple of years now, usually putting it on during late nights when I'm working on a deadline. I never thought I'd be one to share a story. My life is pretty normal, or at least it was. But after what happened last spring, I feel like I need to get it out, to tell someone who might understand. Hearing others share their inexplicable experiences has given me the courage to share mine. So for anyone listening, maybe make yourself a cup of coffee or tea. This story takes place on a winding mountain road, and you'll want to be wide awake for it. My story is about a road, the Federal Highway 175, specifically the stretch that snakes through the Sierra Sur from Oaxaca down to the coast. It's a breathtakingly beautiful drive during the day, with pine oak forests clinging to the sides of mountains that seem to touch the clouds. But at night, it's a different world. It's treacherous, with sharp hairpin turns, steep drop-offs, and a fog that can roll in without warning, thick as milk, swallowing the road whole. Last March, my boyfriend of 5 years, Daniel, ended our relationship. It was sudden, brutal, and it left me completely shattered. To escape the city and the memories that haunted every street corner, I decided to drive down to Zipperlight for a few days, hoping the ocean could wash away some of the pain. My friends told me it was a bad idea to go alone, especially to drive that road at night. But I was stubborn. I think in a way, I wanted the solitude. I wanted the darkness to match what I was feeling inside. I left Oaxaca late in the afternoon, much later than I'd planned. I was driving my little Volkswagen Beetle, a car that had been my trusty companion for years. As I ascended into the mountains, the sun began to set and the temperature dropped. I was feeling numb, lost in a loop of sad memories and what-ifs. The car's speakers were playing a melancholic playlist I'd made, which probably wasn't helping my mood. By the time I reached the highest part of the Sierra, it was completely dark. The fog I'd been dreading had arrived. It crept in from the valleys, thick and damp, reducing my visibility to just a few feet beyond my headlights. I slowed down to a crawl, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The world outside my car had disappeared. There was only the narrow tunnel of light in front of me, the twisted shapes of the pine trees on the edge of the road, and the abyss that I knew was just beyond the flimsy guardrail. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of my engine and the soft music from the speakers. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a loneliness that amplified the ache in my chest. It was just me and my grief, suspended in a sea of white. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was part of the song, a strange, high-pitched vocal I'd never noticed before. I turned the music down. The sound was still there, faint but clear. It was the sound of a woman crying, a desperate, heartbroken sobbing that seemed to come from just outside my car. I slowed down even more, my heart pounding in my throat. I rolled down my window a crack. The cold, damp air rushed in, carrying the sound more clearly. It was real. It was a woman, weeping with a sorrow so raw, it made my own grief feel small and insignificant. The sound was coming from the side of the road, from the direction of the ravine. My first thought was that there had been an accident. Someone had gone off the road and this woman needed help. Despite the fear that was coiling in my stomach, I knew I couldn't just drive on. I pulled over as far as I could, the car's tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. I turned on my hazard lights, their rhythmic flashing barely penetrating the thick fog. I got out of the car, my phone in my hand, its flashlight beam cutting a weak path through the mist. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped. The sudden silence was even more unnerving than the sound had been. All I could hear was the dripping of moisture from the trees and my own ragged breathing. "Hello?" I called again, stepping cautiously toward the guardrail. The sobbing started again, closer this time. It was coming from just over the edge, from down in the ravine. It was a mournful, pleading sound, pulling at something deep inside me. I walked to the guardrail and peered over, shining my phone's light down into the darkness. The beam was swallowed by the fog and the steep black drop. I couldn't see a thing. "I can't see you," I shouted. "Where are you?" A new sound joined the weeping. It was a soft, rhythmic thump. Thump, 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 like a hand tapping on rock, and the crying seemed to be moving, leading me further down the road, along the edge of the precipice. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away as fast as I could. This wasn't right. The fog, the crying, the isolation. It felt like a trap. But the sound of that woman's pain was so real. What if she was hurt, freezing, dying? How could I live with myself if I abandoned her? I followed the sound, walking slowly along the shoulder of the road, one hand on the cold, wet metal of the guardrail. The sobbing was always just ahead of me, just out of sight, drawing me onward. The thumping sound continued, a steady, hypnotic beat. I must have walked for 50 meters, my little car and its flashing lights disappearing behind me in the fog. I stopped at a place where the guardrail was twisted and broken. a clear sign of a past accident. The crying was loudest here, coming from directly below. I leaned over as far as I dared, my light cutting through a patch of fog, and I saw her. For a split second, the mist cleared, and I saw a woman at the bottom of the ravine, crumpled next to a large boulder. She was wearing a white dress, now torn and stained with dirt. Her long, dark hair covered her face, but I could see her shoulders shaking with sobs. She was rhythmically tapping one hand against the rock. Thump, thump, thump. "I see you," I cried, relief flooding through me. "Hold on, I'm calling for help." I fumbled with my phone, my fingers icy and clumsy, but there was no signal. Of course, we were in the middle of the mountains. The woman below me looked up. The fog swirled around her, but I could see her face. It was pale and gaunt, her eyes like dark, empty pits. And she wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, up at the road. She lifted a hand, not to wave, but to point. She pointed a long, slender finger at something behind me. A cold dread washed over me. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest. A pair of headlights was barreling down the road, coming straight at me, far too fast for the conditions. The driver wouldn't see me until it was too late. I was frozen, mesmerized by the approaching lights. At the last second, something snapped me out of it. I threw myself to the side, tumbling onto the gravel shoulder, scraping my hands and knees. The car, a large sedan, swerved violently to avoid hitting me, its tires screeching on the wet pavement. It skidded, the back end swinging out, and slammed into the twisted section of guardrail right where I had been standing. The impact was a sickening crunch of metal. The car teetered there for a horrible moment, half on the road, half over the abyss, before it plunged headfirst into the ravine, disappearing into the fog and darkness below. The sound of its crash echoed up the mountainside, followed by an awful, final silence. The crying from the ravine had stopped. I lay on the ground, shaking uncontrollably, the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filling the air. I slowly pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. I looked back at my car, its hazard lights still blinking innocently in the mist. Then I looked down into the ravine. There was no sign of the woman in the white dress. There was only the wreckage of the car that had just crashed. I stumbled back to my Beetle, got in, and drove. I don't remember the rest of the drive to the coast. It's a black hole in my memory. All I remember is the image of that woman's face, the emptiness in her eyes, and the horrifying realization that she hadn't been crying for help. She had been luring me, or maybe not me. Maybe she was luring anyone who was foolish enough to stop. When I got to Zipperlit, I read the local news online. For years, there have been an unusual number of single vehicle accidents on that stretch of Highway 175, especially on foggy nights. They're always at the same hairpin turn, the one with the broken guardrail. The locals have a name for her, La Llorona de la Sierra. They say she was a woman who lost her husband and child in a crash on that very spot. And now her grieving spirit endlessly relives the tragedy, calling out to other drivers, pulling them down into the ravine with her. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say I was distraught, that I imagined it. But I know what I saw. I know she pointed. I wasn't the one she was after that night. But I can't shake the feeling that I was used as bait. Her grief called to my own, and I almost paid the price. Be careful on those mountain roads. And if you hear someone crying in the fog, don't stop, just keep driving. Some sorrows are so deep they become a hunger, and they will gladly feed on yours. And now we continue with another testimony, the toll collector. Good evening, Mr. Williams and the community. My name is Arturo, and I'm calling from Toluca. Well, I'm not calling, I'm writing this email, but it feels more personal to say it that way. I'm a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. which means I spend most of my life on the road, driving from city to city, clinic to clinic. I've been listening to your show for years on those long, lonely drives. It's been a strange comfort. A few weeks ago, you aired a story about a phantom building, and it stirred a memory I've kept buried for a long time. I decided it was finally time to share it. So, wherever you are, dim the lights. Imagine you're behind the wheel, with miles of dark highway stretching out before you. That's where this happened. This was about 10 years ago. I was in my late 20s, hungry and ambitious, trying to climb the corporate ladder as fast as I could. I was covering a route through the more rural parts of the state of Mexico, visiting small-town doctors and pharmacies. It was grueling work, with long hours and endless driving. One evening, I found myself leaving the town of Ixtapan de la Sal much later than planned. I had a dinner meeting in Toluca that I absolutely could not miss. My boss was going to be there. Looking at the map on my phone, back when the GPS was still a novelty, I saw two routes. The main toll highway, which was safe and well lit, but would add at least 40 minutes to my trip, or a state road, a libre, that cut straight through the hills. It was marked as a more direct route, but it looked like a thin, winding line on the screen. Against my better judgment, fueled by coffee and career ambition, I chose the shortcut. The sun had already set, and the road quickly devolved from decent pavement to a patchwork of asphalt and potholes. It was a classic rural road, flanked by dense trees and the occasional small rancho with a single flickering light bulb. There were no streetlights, no other cars. My headlights were the only thing cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. I remember feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. This was a stupid risk to take for a dinner meeting. After about half an hour of navigating tight curves and uneven terrain, I saw lights up ahead. At first, I was relieved. I thought I was approaching a small town or a junction, but as I got closer, the shape became clear and my relief turned to confusion. It was a toll booth. It stood there in the middle of nowhere, an old concrete structure with 3 lanes. It was absurdly out of place on this forgotten road. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The paint was peeling, the concrete was cracked and stained, and weeds grew from the base of the structure. The signs that once indicated the toll prices were rusted and completely illegible. But it wasn't abandoned. 2 of the lanes were blocked off with faded orange barrels, but the one on the right was open, and inside the booth, a single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light, and a man was sitting there. I slowed my car to a stop, my mind struggling to process the scene. Why was there an active toll booth on a road that was barely maintained? There were no signs leading up to it, no indication of a toll road. It made no sense. The man in the booth was old, with a thin, gaunt face and skin like wrinkled parchment. He wore a faded dark blue uniform that looked like it belonged to another era. He didn't look at me as I pulled up. He just sat there, staring straight ahead at a point in the darkness, his expression completely blank. I rolled down my window. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "I didn't realize this was a toll road. How much is it?" The man didn't move. He didn't even seem to blink. His stillness was deeply unsettling. He looked less like a person and more like a wax figure. The only sound was the chirping of crickets in the surrounding woods and the idling of my engine. "Excuse me," I said, a little louder this time. "Sir, how much is the toll?" Slowly, as if moving through water, the man turned his head to look at me. His eyes were milky and unfocused, like those of a blind man, but I felt his gaze on me, cold and heavy. He raised a hand and pointed a long, bony finger at a small, rusted metal box on the counter in front of him. It had a slot on the top, like a collection box. He still hadn't said a word. The whole situation felt like a dream, a strange, disjointed nightmare. I was getting annoyed and increasingly creeped out. "Look, I just need to know the price," I insisted. "I need to get to Toluca." The man's expression didn't change, but he slowly shook his head. Then he pointed again at the box, this time more insistently. I leaned forward, squinting. There was something written on the side of the box, hand-painted in crude white letters. It was one word: un recuerdo, a memory. My blood ran cold. What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He simply pointed at me, then back at the box. The toll was a memory. This had to be a joke, a bizarre local prank. Or maybe this man was crazy, a hermit living in this old booth. But my gut told me this was something else entirely. The air around the booth felt heavy, stagnant. The yellow light seemed to suck the warmth from the air. I thought about just driving off, crashing through the flimsy plastic barrier. But I was frozen by a fear I couldn't explain. I felt compelled to do as he asked. It was as if I had no other choice. A memory. What kind of memory? A good one? A bad one? I looked at the man's empty eyes and felt that he didn't care. He was just a collector. My mind, in its panic, latched onto the most trivial thing it could find. A stupid, meaningless memory from my childhood. The time I stole a candy bar from a corner store when I was 7 years old. The thrill of it, followed by the crushing guilt when my mother found the wrapper and made me go back and apologize. It was a silly, insignificant thing. I focused on it, pictured the store owner's disappointed face, my mother's stern expression. I thought, okay, you can have that one. It's yours. As I focused on the memory, I felt a strange, light-headed sensation, like a faint electrical current running through my brain. The old man in the booth slowly nodded, as if he had received something. Then, with that same agonizing slowness, he pressed a button on his console. The wooden barrier in front of my lane creaked and lifted, opening the way forward. He turned his gaze back to the darkness ahead, his job done. He was once again a wax figure in a forgotten museum. I didn't need another invitation. I hit the gas, my tires squealing on the pavement as I sped away from that impossible place. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see. I drove like a madman until I hit the main highway again. The bright lights and the presence of other cars a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. When I finally reached the restaurant in Toluca, I was over an hour late. My boss was furious. I tried to explain that I'd gotten lost, that I'd taken a wrong turn, but the words felt hollow. I couldn't tell them the truth. But here's the strangest part. Later that night, as I was trying to fall asleep in my hotel room, I tried to recall that memory, the one of the stolen candy bar, and I couldn't. I knew it had happened. I had the factual knowledge of the event, like reading a paragraph in a history book, but the feeling was gone. The guilt, the fear, the image of the store owner's face. It was all blank. It was like a file had been erased from my mind. I had paid the toll. I've never been able to find that road again. I've looked for it on maps, on satellite images. It's not there. It's as if it never existed. But I know it's real. I have a blank space in my mind where a childhood memory used to be. I often wonder what would have happened if I'd given him a more important memory. A first kiss, the day my brother was born, the face of my grandmother. Would those be gone too? And I wonder about the other drivers who have taken that shortcut. What memories have they left behind in that rusty little box, in the care of the silent toll collector? What parts of themselves have they paid to pass? So be careful with shortcuts. Sometimes the price is much higher than you can imagine. That was my account. Let's continue with the next story. The children on the shoulder. Hi, Mr. Williams and the community that listens every night. My name is Javier. I'm an architect from Guadalajara. I'm a father of two, a boy and a girl, and they are my entire world. I'm writing to you because my wife insisted. She says I haven't been the same since our trip last summer, that I need to talk about it. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. I'm a man of logic, of blueprints and stress calculations. But I can't logically explain what I saw, and the memory of it keeps me awake at night. For those of you with children, hold them a little closer tonight. This story is for you. Maybe turn on a small light. This one still feels very dark to me. Last August, we decided to take a family vacation to the coast of Nayarit. We wanted to avoid the expensive toll roads, so we planned a route that would take us through the backroads of Jalisco, through small towns and agave fields. It was meant to be a scenic drive, an adventure. We were in our SUV. The kids, Sophia, who was 8, and Mateo, who was 6, were in the back, entertained by a tablet. My wife, Laura, was in the passenger seat, navigating and pointing out interesting sights. The mood was light, happy. The sun was shining, and the landscape was a beautiful tapestry of green and blue. We were driving on a 2-lane state highway, a well-paved but narrow road that wound through rolling hills. It was mid-afternoon when we entered a stretch of road flanked by thick, dense woods. The trees grew right up to the edge of the asphalt, creating a green tunnel that the sun struggled to penetrate. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. It was beautiful, but also a little claustrophobic. Sophia, my daughter, was the first to see them. "Dad, look," she said, pointing out her window. "There are kids playing." I glanced to the right. On the narrow gravel shoulder, just a few feet from the speeding cars, were 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe a little younger than my own kids. They were dressed in simple, almost old-fashioned clothes. The girl was in a plain white dress, and the boy wore shorts and a button-up shirt. They were tossing a small red ball back and forth. A wave of alarm went through me. "What are they doing playing so close to the road?" I said to Laura. "Where are their parents?" Laura craned her neck to look. "I don't see a house or a car anywhere. That's so dangerous." The children seemed completely oblivious to us. They were laughing, their movements full of an innocent, carefree energy. But there was something off about them. Their laughter didn't reach my ears, even with the windows down. They were silent, and their movements were a little too perfect, a little too repetitive, like a video on a loop. As we drove past, the boy missed the ball. It bounced once on the gravel and then rolled directly into the road, right into our path. Instinct took over. I slammed on the brakes and swerved to the left into the oncoming lane. My heart was in my throat. Thank God there were no other cars coming. The SUV screeched to a halt halfway across the yellow line. The tablet flew from the back seat, and my own kids cried out in alarm. "What happened?" Laura gasped, her hand on the dashboard. "The ball," I said, my voice shaky. I didn't want to hit their ball. I looked in my rearview mirror. The 2 children were standing on the shoulder, watching us. They weren't laughing anymore. They were just standing there, side by side, their faces pale and serious. The red ball sat in the middle of the road behind us. "Are you okay?" I asked my kids. They were shaken but fine. "Dad, you almost crashed," Mateo said, his voice small. "I know, buddy, I'm sorry." I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. "I'm going to get their ball for them." "Javier, no," Laura said, her voice tight with fear. "Just leave it. Let's go. Something doesn't feel right." She was right. The silence from the 2 children was unnatural. The woods around us felt watchful, menacing. But I'm a father. The thought of those kids running into the road after their ball was unbearable. It would only take a second. "I'll be quick," I said, ignoring her plea. I put the car in park and got out. The air outside was cold, much colder than it should have been on a summer afternoon. The woods were deathly quiet. No birds, no insects, just the hum of my own car's engine. As I walked back toward the red ball, I kept my eyes on the children. They didn't move a muscle. They just watched me with large, dark eyes that seemed too old for their small faces. I picked up the ball. It was surprisingly heavy, made of a dense, solid rubber, and it was cold to the touch, as if it had been sitting in a freezer. I turned to walk it over to them. "Here's your ball," I said, forcing a smile. "You two need to be more careful. This is a dangerous place to play." I was about 10 feet away from them when they did something that stopped me in my tracks. They both raised their right hands and pointed, not at me, but at my car, at my family inside. Their expressions were flat, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a childish gesture. It was a deliberate, cold act of indication. A paralyzing fear, unlike anything I have ever known, gripped me. It was a primal, gut-wrenching terror. My brain was screaming, "They're not children. Get away. Get your family away." Behind me, I heard the roar of an engine. I turned my head and saw a large cargo truck barreling down the hill, coming straight for my parked SUV. The driver was laying on the horn, a desperate blaring sound that echoed through the silent woods. He couldn't stop in time. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted toward my car, shouting, "Laura, drive, drive now." She didn't hesitate. She must have seen the truck in the side mirror. She slid into the driver's seat, threw the car in gear, and stomped on the gas. The SUV shot forward, back into our lane, just as I reached the passenger door and threw myself inside. The truck thundered past us, its horn still blasting, the driver shaking his fist at us. He missed our car by inches. If we had been there 1 second longer, we would have been obliterated. I slammed the door shut, my chest heaving, my body trembling. Laura was crying, and the kids were screaming in the back. I looked back at the shoulder where the 2 children had been standing. They were gone. The woods were empty. There was no sign that they had ever been there. But in my hand, I was still clutching the cold, heavy, red ball. Without a word, I rolled down the window and threw it as far as I could into the trees. We didn't stop driving until we were out of those woods and back in the bright, open sunlight of the agave fields. We checked into the first hotel we found in the next town and held each other for a long time. We never made it to the coast. The next day, we turned around and drove home, taking the main toll highway, surrounded by as many other cars as possible. I can't explain what happened. Were they ghosts? Were they some kind of evil spirits that haunt that road? I've searched online for accidents in that area involving children, but I've found nothing. It's as if they don't exist, except in my memory. But I know they were real. They made me swerve. They made me stop. They pointed. It was a setup. They used the concern of parents, our deepest instinct to protect, as a weapon. They lure you into a trap. We were just lucky. The family in the next car might not be. I look at my own children now, and I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. I see their innocence, their carefree joy, and I remember those 2 silent children on the side of the road, with their old eyes and their cold, pointing fingers. Please, be careful on the back roads. And if you see children playing where they shouldn't be, don't stop. I know that sounds monstrous, but sometimes the most compassionate act is to just keep driving. That's my experience. Let's hear what the next person has to share. The silent procession. Good evening, Mr. Williams. My name is Dr. Morales. I'm a general practitioner in a small community in the highlands of Michoacan. I've been a doctor here for over 40 years. I've delivered babies, set bones, and held the hands of the dying. I'm a man of science, of observable facts and biological certainties. I've always believed that for every mystery, there is a rational explanation waiting to be discovered. I still try to believe that. But one night, many years ago, I saw something that shook my belief system to its very core. A friend of mine who listens to your podcast suggested I share my story, thinking it might find a home among your community. I invite your listeners to prepare for a journey into a night shrouded in fog and tradition, a night where the line between the living and the dead becomes blurred. The events I'm about to describe took place on the 2nd of November, Dia de Muertos. In my region, this is a deeply significant time. The air is thick with the sweet, cloying smell of cempasúchil flowers. The scent of copal incense hangs heavy in the streets, and the nights are filled with candlelight and quiet prayer. It's a time of remembrance, of celebrating the lives of those who have passed. It is beautiful, solemn, and deeply ingrained in our culture. That night, I had been called out to a remote rancho deep in the mountains to tend to an elderly woman, Doña Elvira, who was suffering from a severe case of pneumonia. The journey was arduous. The road was little more than a dirt track, slick with mud from the recent rains, and a thick cold fog had descended upon the mountains, a common occurrence at this time of year. It clung to the trees and blanketed the valleys, muffling all sound and creating a sense of profound isolation. After treating Doña Elvira and ensuring she was stable, I began the long drive back to my clinic in town. It was well past midnight. My old pickup truck struggled on the muddy road, its headlights cutting a feeble path through the dense fog. I was exhausted, running on fumes and black coffee, my mind occupied with thoughts of my patient. The atmosphere of Dia de Muertos was all around me. Small, candlelit altars glowed faintly from the windows of the few houses I passed, offerings of food and drink left out for the visiting souls. I was on a particularly remote stretch of the road, winding through a dense pine forest, when I saw the lights up ahead. They were faint, flickering, and yellow. Not the headlights of another vehicle, but the soft, warm glow of candles. Dozens of them. As I drove closer, my confusion grew. The lights were moving, proceeding slowly down the middle of the road, coming toward me. I slowed the truck to a crawl and peered through the windshield. It was a procession, a funeral procession. There were perhaps 20 or 30 people, all walking with a slow, measured pace. The men were dressed in dark, simple peasant clothing, their hats held respectfully in their hands. The women were covered in dark rebozos, their heads bowed. They were all carrying tall white candles, their flames dancing in the misty air. In the center of the group, 4 men were carrying a simple, unadorned wooden coffin on their shoulders. My first thought was one of deep sadness. To have a burial at this hour, on this night, was a profound tragedy. But as they drew nearer, a sense of unease began to creep over me. Something was fundamentally wrong with the scene. They were completely silent. There were no prayers, no murmurs, no weeping. The only sound was the soft shuffling of their feet on the muddy ground. A funeral procession in my community is a loud affair, filled with the sounds of grief and remembrance. This silence was unnatural, oppressive. They paid me no mind. They kept to the center of the road, forcing me to pull my truck as far over as I could, my tires sinking into the soft, muddy shoulder. They walked past my window, so close I could have reached out and touched them. I looked at their faces, illuminated by the flickering candlelight. They were grim, gaunt, and strangely indistinct, as if viewed through a pane of frosted glass. Their eyes were all fixed forward, staring into the fog with a hollow, vacant intensity. They did not look at me. They did not acknowledge my presence in any way. It was as if I wasn't there. The smell of damp earth and decaying pine needles suddenly intensified, mingling with the scent of melting wax. It was a heavy, funereal odor that filled the cab of my truck. A deep, instinctual chill traced its way down my spine. These were not my neighbors. I had lived in this region my entire life. I knew every family for miles around. I did not recognize a single face. As the coffin passed by my window, I felt an overwhelming urge to see who they were mourning. I leaned forward, trying to get a better look. The coffin was crudely made of rough, unfinished pine, and on the lid there was no name, no cross, no marking of any kind. It was completely blank. The last of the procession shuffled past, and the candle lights began to recede into the fog behind me. I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. My scientific mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A remote community I was unaware of, a secretive religious sect, a strange local custom. None of it fit. Nothing could explain the profound sense of wrongness, the chilling silence, the utter lack of recognition. Finally, I put the truck in gear and continued on my way, driving faster than I should have on the treacherous road. I needed to put as much distance as possible between myself and that silent procession. When I finally arrived back in town, the first light of dawn was breaking. The festivities of Dia de Muertos were winding down. I went straight to the old parish priest, Father Miguel, a man I respected, and told him what I had seen. He listened patiently, his face growing more and more grave as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, stirring his coffee. "Doctor," he said finally, his voice low, "there is a story, an old legend, about that particular stretch of road. They say that many, many years ago, during the Cristero War, a small, isolated village in those mountains was wiped out. They had refused to renounce their faith. Federales came in the night and executed every man, woman, and child. They were buried without ceremony, without last rites, in an unmarked mass grave somewhere in that forest." He looked me straight in the eye. "The old people say that on the night of the dead, when the souls of the departed are permitted to return, they walk. They carry an empty coffin, forever searching for a proper burial ground, for a priest to give them their final peace. They are the Procesión de las Ánimas, the procession of the lost souls." I left the priest's home with my scientific certainty shattered into a million pieces. A legend, a ghost story. And yet it was the only explanation that felt true, that matched the deep, cold dread I had felt in the presence of those silent mourners. I have never told this story to many people. As a man of medicine, it undermines my credibility. But I know what I saw. I saw a procession of people who were not of this world, trapped in a loop of silent, eternal grief. They were not malevolent. They were just lost. Sometimes, especially on foggy nights, I think of them. I wonder if they are still walking that lonely road, carrying their empty burden, forever searching for a peace they will never find. And I am reminded that there are wounds so deep that not even time can heal them, and there are mysteries that science will never be able to explain. That was my account. May we continue to listen to the whispers in the night. The scent of wet earth. Good evening, Mr. Williams. My name is Mateo, and I'm a farmer from a small ejido near Papantla, in the state of Veracruz. I am a man of the earth. My hands are stained with it. My life is governed by its seasons, by the sun and the rain. I listen to your show on a small battery-powered radio while I work in the vanilla orchards late into the evening. Your stories are good company. I am writing to you now because something has been happening on the road to my land, something that has unsettled the quiet rhythm of my life. My wife says I should tell someone that a burden shared is a burden lightened. I invite you and your listeners to come with me to a dusty dirt road under a hot, unforgiving sun. Breathe in the smell of dry soil and wilting leaves. That is where our story begins. For the last year, our region has been suffering under a terrible drought. The sun has been relentless, baking the earth into a cracked, pale crust. The rivers have shrunk to trickles, and the corn stalks in the fields are brittle and brown. Every day, we look to the sky, praying for rain, but the sky remains a vast, empty, brilliant blue. The air is always thick with the smell of dust and dry heat. The only way to get to my orchard is a narrow dirt road that winds through the low hills for about 5 kilometers from the main paved highway. It's a lonely road, flanked by pastures that are more brown than green, and dotted with skeletal-looking trees. I drive it every day in my old Datsun pickup, a truck that has served me for 30 years and knows the road as well as I do. The strange occurrences began about 3 months ago. It was late afternoon, and I was driving home after a long, frustrating day of trying to irrigate my thirsty vanilla vines. The heat was oppressive, and the air was still and heavy. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend in the road, a hairpin turn known locally as La Curva del Diablo, the Devil's Curve, a strange scent hit me. It was the smell of rain, not just any rain, but the rich, loamy, life-giving scent of a downpour hitting dry earth. It's a smell we call petrichor, the perfume of the soil. It's a scent every farmer in this region has been desperately craving for months. It was so strong, so real, that I actually smiled. I looked up at the sky, expecting to see dark, heavy clouds, but the sky was perfectly clear, the sun still beating down mercilessly. I slowed the truck, confused. The smell was only in this one spot, right on the curve. As I drove through it, it was as if I had passed through an invisible wall of fragrance. A few meters later, it was gone, replaced once again by the familiar smell of dust. I stopped the truck and got out. I looked at the ground. The red earth was bone dry, cracked and hard as rock. There was no sign of moisture. I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, a phantom scent born of wishful thinking. A week later it happened again. Same spot, same time of day. This time the smell was accompanied by another impossibility. As I entered the curve, the road beneath my tires suddenly felt slick, muddy. The truck fishtailed slightly, and I had to fight the wheel to keep it under control. It felt exactly as if I had hit a patch of wet mud. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the road behind me was a cloud of red dust. Dry. Now I was no longer confused. I was scared. The air on that curve felt cold, damp. My skin broke out in goosebumps, despite the suffocating heat. It felt like the place was haunted by the memory of rain, a ghost of a storm that wasn't there. I started asking some of the old-timers in the ejido about the curve. At first, no one wanted to talk about it. They would cross themselves and change the subject. But finally, old Don Ramiro, a man who has lived here for 90 years, took me aside. He told me that about 50 years ago, there was a terrible accident on that curve. A young couple from a nearby village was driving on the wedding day. They were in an old car, and a sudden violent thunderstorm rolled in. One of those fierce Veracruz storms that can turn a dry road into a river of mud in minutes. The driver lost control on the slick curve, and the car plunged into the gully below. Both of them were killed instantly. The earth was thirsty that day, Mateo, Don Ramiro said, his voice a low whisper, and it drank them both. After that, I tried to avoid the road when I could, but it was the only way to my land. Every time I passed the curve, the phenomenon was there. the impossible smell of rain, the phantom mud. Sometimes it was more intense than others. One day, I even saw a shimmering on the road, like heat haze, but cold. I started to dread my daily commute. That stretch of road which I had known my whole life had become a place of fear. The climax of this story, if you can call it that, happened last week. The drought was at its worst. My vanilla vines were dying, and my heart was heavy with the fear of losing my livelihood, my family's legacy. I was driving home at dusk, feeling utterly defeated. As I approached the Devil's Curve, the smell of wet earth was stronger than I had ever experienced it. It was overwhelming, almost nauseating. The road became incredibly slick, and this time, my old truck couldn't handle it. The back end slid out, and the truck spun, coming to a stop sideways, completely blocking the narrow road. The engine stalled. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I tried to restart the engine. Nothing. It was dead. I was trapped in this one spot on Earth where the laws of nature seemed to have been suspended. And then I heard it. A soft, gentle sound, like a woman humming a lullaby. It was coming from the gully beside the road. Against my better judgment, I got out of the truck, my pocket knife clutched in my hand. I walked to the edge of the road and peered down into the gathering darkness. The humming was clearer now, melancholic and sweet. And I saw something. At the bottom of the gully, next to a rusted piece of metal that might have once been part of a car door, was a figure. It was a woman, kneeling on the ground. She was wearing a white dress, or what was left of one. It was tattered and stained with the red earth. She was digging in the dry dirt with her bare hands, her head bowed, humming her sad, tuneless song. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel an immense, bottomless sorrow radiating from her. It was the grief of a bride who never made it to her new life, forever bound to the place where it was all taken away. She wasn't trying to scare me. She didn't even seem to know I was there. She was just trapped in her final moments, in a phantom storm, forever digging in the earth that had claimed her. I backed away slowly, my fear replaced by a profound sense of pity. I got back in my truck, and this time, when I turned the key, the engine sputtered to life. I managed to get the truck turned around and drove away, back toward the main highway, leaving her there with her song and her sorrow. I haven't been back to my orchard since. I don't know what to do. The drought continues. The earth is still thirsty. And I know she is still there, on that curve, forever bringing a rain that will never fall, forever turning the dry dust to mud. They say that ghosts are echoes of strong emotions left behind. If that's true, then the spirit on that road is not one of anger or vengeance. It's an echo of love and loss, so powerful that it has stained the very land itself. And I don't know how to wash that stain away. The reflected passenger. Good evening, Mr. Williams, and to everyone tuned in to Roads of Darkness. My name is Ricardo. For 15 years, I've been a taxi driver in Mexico City. I work the night shift. I've seen it all, or so I thought. I've driven through every neighborhood, from the posh streets of Polanco to the darkest alleys of Iztapalapa. The city at night is a different animal. It's my office, my world. My son, who's a mechanic, listens to your show while he works and told me my story was pure Roads of Darkness material. He said I should send it in. So here it is, a story from the lonely hours, when the city sleeps and other things awaken. I ask that you find a quiet place to listen. Imagine the glow of the city lights, the empty streets, and the solitude of a car moving through the sleeping metropolis. This is a story about what you can see when you're not looking directly. My taxi is my sanctuary, a 2010 Tsuru, reliable and unassuming. The seats have seen 1,000 stories. The dashboard is cluttered with a rosary, a photo of my daughter, and a small St. Christopher medallion. The radio is always on, tuned to a soft music station, a constant companion in the silence between fares. This happened a few months back, on a Tuesday night. Tuesdays are always slow. The weekend revelers are gone, and the city takes a breath. I was working the fringes, the sprawling suburbs on the edge of the city, hoping to catch someone coming off a late shift at one of the factories. It was around 3 a.m. The streets were deserted, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. A thin fog was rolling in, making the familiar landscape feel strange and alien. I was cruising down Avenida Tlahuac, a long, wide artery that goes on forever, when I saw him. He was standing on the corner under a flickering streetlight, just a dark silhouette. I pulled over, as I've done thousands of times. He opened the back door and slid in without a word. "Good morning, where to?" I asked, looking at him in the rearview mirror. That's when the first strange thing happened. As I looked in the mirror, I saw him clearly. He was a young man, maybe in his early 20s. He was soaking wet, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, dripping water onto the seat. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were wide and dark. He looked like he was in shock. But it hadn't been raining. The streets were bone dry. "Just drive," he said. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo inside the car. It was a strange, hollow sound. "Okay, pal, but I need a destination," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, his reflection in the mirror looking right through me. A chill went down my spine. The cab suddenly felt icy cold, and the smell of stagnant water, like a riverbed or a canal, filled the small space. I turned around in my seat to face him directly. The back seat was empty. My heart stopped. I swear, for a second it just stopped. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked back at the rearview mirror. He was there, the pale, dripping young man, staring back at me with those haunted eyes. I looked over my shoulder again. Nothing. Just an empty, worn-out back seat. He only existed in the reflection. I should have stopped the car. I should have jumped out and run. But I was frozen in a state of disbelief and sheer, paralyzing terror. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. My foot was still on the gas. The car was still moving, a driverless-looking vessel cruising through the foggy streets. "Where did you come from?" I managed to whisper, my eyes fixed on his reflection in the mirror. His reflection didn't answer. It just continued to stare, a single tear tracing a path down his wet cheek. The sorrow in that reflection was palpable. It was a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight in the car. I kept driving. I didn't know what else to do. It felt like I was no longer in control. I was just a chauffeur for a ghost in my mirror. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, through empty streets and sleeping neighborhoods. I watched him in the mirror, and he watched me. We were two solitary beings, one of flesh and bone, one of memory and water, trapped together in a little metal box. I started to notice our route. We were heading south, toward the canals of Xochimilco. An old, deep-seated dread began to bubble up inside me. The canals at night are not a friendly place. Finally, his reflection moved. He raised a hand, his fingers long and pale, and pointed toward a small, unlit side street that led down toward one of the old canals. "There," his hollow voice whispered, seeming to come from the mirror itself. My body obeyed. I turned the car down the dark, narrow street. It ended at a small, dilapidated pier. The air here was thick with the smell of wet earth and algae. The fog was so dense I could barely see the dark, still water of the canal just a few feet away. I stopped the car and killed the engine. The silence was absolute. I looked in the mirror. The young man's reflection was still there. He slowly turned his head and looked out the rear window toward the canal. He gave a small, sad nod. Then his reflection began to fade. It didn't disappear in a flash. It dissolved, like sugar in water, becoming more and more transparent until all that was left was the empty back seat, both in the mirror and in reality. The cold in the cab dissipated. The smell of water was gone. I was alone. I sat there for a long time, my mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then my eyes were drawn to something on the pier. Tacked to a wooden post was a small, weather-beaten poster with a faded photograph. It was a picture of the young man from my mirror. Underneath, his name, his age, and a single word, desaparecido, missing. It said he was last seen a year ago, near this very canal. I finally understood. He hadn't wanted a ride. He had just wanted to be found. He had brought me to the place where his journey had ended, hoping someone would finally know where to look. The next day, I made an anonymous call to the police. I told them to search the canal near that old pier. I don't know if they did or if they found him. I was too scared to follow up. I never wanted to have any connection to that night again. But it has changed me. I still drive the night shift, but it's different now. I find myself glancing at the rearview mirror, even when the cab is empty. I'm more aware of the silence, of the stories that linger in the dark corners of the city. The city is full of ghosts, Mr. Williams. Most of them are just memories, but some of them just want a ride home. Be careful what you see in your mirrors. Sometimes they reflect more than just what's behind you.